Welcome to Fun with pH.
I'm Greg.
I'm Julie, and we're the Crafty Winers.
That was pHun.
pHun, yes.
Not quite a pun.
Not quite a pun and not exactly fun.
So we had a pH video that this is going to replace effectively. The intent of this one is to be a lot more comprehensive than that one was. That was early in our YouTube career. We'll be trying to hide that one probably as much as possible.
It's still interesting.
It's interesting. We spent a lot of time showing you how to use the different acids and alkalines and raise and lower pH. And it was
In water.
using
Yeah.
water, and it was 2 hours long and highly edited to try to get it down to like 20 minutes. So it was kind of a mess. But
Still interesting, but this one's going to be a lot more informative and
we have a lot to cover. So we have notes tonight. We normally
Yes, we
don't
do
do
have
that,
notes.
but we are trying to pack a lot in and not miss anything. So we are going to be referring to notes. So pH, what is it? It is a measurement of alkalinity or basicity, usually of a liquid, almost exclusively of liquids. So everything has a pH that tells how acidic or basic it is. And we've got a little chart that I will put up above, but we're going to look at it upright. So hydrochloric acid is a 0 pH. Drain cleaner is super basic, and it is a 14. And that actually, coincidentally, sodium hydroxide is one of the chemicals we're going to be showing tonight, and a lot of drain cleaners use that as the main ingredient. But in the middle of the pH scale, you've got distilled water. When it's fresh distilled water, it is a pH of 7. But I didn't know until we did the first video that if distilled water is exposed to oxygen, it starts becoming more acidic.
Yeah.
So its pH starts to drop. pH, the lower the number, the more acidic it is. The higher the number, the more alkaline it is, or basic. Blood is between a 7 and 8, according to the chart. Wine, the chart shows being 4, but we know from, and we'll go over the fact that wine can be less than 4.
I'm surprised at this one. It's not milk of magnesia, just magnesia?
No, milk of magnesia.
Yeah, okay. Milk of magnesia and ammonia are in the same place?
So milk of magnesia you take for upset stomach, right?
Yeah,
Which
for
makes
heartburn.
sense that it's alkaline.
Yeah, but what about ammonia? That doesn't seem like it would
Don't
be.
take that for an upset stomach.
Well, I know that, but it doesn't seem like it would be very alkaline, so that's surprising to me.
There are a couple that are kind of surprising, but some of them that are not. Baking soda looks like around a 9. So it's interesting. Even though the scale goes from 0 to 14, there are liquids that are below 0 and above 14. So just be aware that there are things that can be lower or higher.
But I did not know that.
I didn't know that till today. Technically, pH is the negative base 10 log of the concentration of hydrogen ions.
Is there going to be a test
If you're
after
going
that?
to try to impress your friends with your knowledge, there's the one sentence that you can rattle off that will astound them. So as far as in winemaking, yeasts like to be in the range between 4 and 6. That's where they do best. It really doesn't matter what type of yeast it is. The modern strains of wine yeast can do well in quite a bit under 4, but we have been in the habit of trying to keep our fermentations at right around 4 to start with. As fermentation happens, it naturally lowers in pH, typically.
Yeah.
Sometimes we see that it doesn't, but almost 9 times out of 10, the pH will drop as the must ferments. The pH will go down. So starting it at 4, most likely it's going to end up less than 4 when it's done fermenting.
And also, as the wine ages, the acidity goes down.
Yeah, so it's important to start at a higher acidity, which is a lower pH, because the acid is going to deplete as the wine ages, and you want there to still be acid in it as it ages.
Probably more important in red wines.
Even an acidic wine, if it sits long enough, can lose that acid and go bad over enough time. So like a 600-year wine, you might not want to.
Started at 2. So pH is especially important in brewing of all kinds, so winemaking and cider and beer, mead, because it can affect the taste and the color of the wine, but most importantly, keeping the microbial growth down and keeping it shelf stable is why we shoot for under 3.8.
If you're not going to bottle it, it's really not important to get it to 3.8 or below. You can just go off of the way that it tastes to you. It either needs to
That's
taste
true.
more or less acidic. So a lot of times what we brew or ferment is going to end up going into our fridge and we're going to drink it within a month or so. I wouldn't worry much about the pH at that point. But if you're going to bottle it, you don't know how long somebody's going to save it, so you should think about pH.
Yeah. Our ciders, we don't do too much adjustment on because we drink them pretty fast.
Correct. And we carbonate them.
Yeah, that's true.
It's actually not in our notes, but carbonating adds an acid, carbonic acid, to the cider. So that makes it more acidic.
So basically, wines with a higher pH are more likely to spoil.
Correct.
Yeah,
Less acidic.
less acidic, yeah.
Yeah, that acid does help. It keeps some microbial life out of the brew and protects it in other ways.
Which is good. Wines with a higher pH are also more likely to oxidate,
Or spoil.
or spoil, which is not good.
So as far as bottling is concerned, the wisdom from the old winemakers is that you want to have it 3.6 or lower to be shelf stable. We typically go to 3.8 because we've noticed there's definitely a taste difference between 3.8 and 3.6. We stop at 3.8 and then we will determine whether we want to go lower or not based on the taste and the TA, which we're going to go over here in a minute. 3.2, there are some white wines that we really don't like to drink that are down on that 3.2 range, including.
Didn't we have one that was 3.1?
We just drank one yesterday
Yeah.
that was a blueberry
Chenin Blanc.
that was 3.2-ish and very acidic. And I end up with a little bit of a heartburn problem usually after drinking a little bit of that. So it's a little too acidic for us, and that's not one of our preferred wines because of that.
That's why we added the blueberry.
The blueberry made it better.
Yeah.
I don't know that it raised the pH. I don't think we tested it after we added the
I
blueberry.
don't think it raised the pH much, but it definitely added a flavor that covered over the sour.
Some of it, yeah. 3.3 and 3.8 is the range for red wines. Whites are 3.2 to 3.4. Apple cider, hard apple cider, is commonly 3.2 to 3.8, so actually very similar to red wine. So that we do pay attention to those numbers when we are doing cider as well as wine.
Yep.
And again, we try to be at 3.8 or lower on anything that we're going to bottle because my note says when it's above that, a lot of bacteria have an easier time proliferating.
Proliferating?
Yeah.
Wow.
So 3.8 is kind of a magic number for us, and you'll notice that in our other videos.
And then we'll adjust based on taste preferences.
Correct. We've noticed too, we didn't see a lot of documentation about it, but we've had some wines that came out with a little bit of sugar in them. So a specific gravity or a final gravity of like 1.06 is one that we've seen on a couple different batches of Merlot. We've noticed that lowering the pH has an additional benefit of hiding some of that sweetness.
Yeah.
So we can now make a determination whether or not we want to restart a stalled fermentation, or if it's down around 1.06, we might just cover it up with a little more acidic taste.
Yeah. Seems to work.
Okay, so that was our levels and general explanation of pH. So we're going to get into the types of acids first of all, and we have them out here.
Tartaric acid?
So different fruits usually have a primary and sometimes secondary and sometimes more type of acid that make up that fruit flavor. So we have a huge bag of citric. So
It was too big to put on the counter.
It's as big as our counter, so we put it in a small container. But this is citric acid. As it sounds, citric is the main acid in citrus. So oranges, lemons, limes, Malic acid, this has a picture of an apple on it. That might tell you that that's the primary one for apple. So if you're making a cider, that's the acid that you want to use. This is what you're going to want to use if you're making a lemonade, probably. Or you could make it more interesting,
Yeah.
maybe, and put a different type of acid. But typically, sticking with the acid for the main fruit of the beverage you're making is a wise idea if you don't want it to taste abnormal. And then
Tartaric acid.
that's great.
And this is the one we use the most of.
Yeah. Wines, you're safest using that because it's not going to change the wine flavor as much. It will. I mean, if you get overboard on any of these acids, it will change the flavor. You'll be able to taste it. But
What I noticed with this one is it doesn't really change the flavor very much. It does lower the sweetness. So if you're wanting it sweet, you got to be careful
you
with
can taste
it.
the zing.
Yeah.
But it's not an abnormal. It's if you're used to drinking wine, you're used to that zing because this is what winemakers use to lower the pH.
But if you're putting citric acid in your Merlot,
Right.
it's going to make it sour.
And we have done that before,
Yep,
once
we
or
have.
twice on accident, and it can pretty much ruin a good red wine to put citric acid in it because it starts tasting like lemon Merlot,
Which
and that's
isn't
not pleasant.
not a good flavor.
There are other acids that we don't use, and in fact, I don't believe we have some of the more rare ones that we've had in the past. We don't have anymore because they do go bad and we throw them out. But one thing I thought was interesting is a strawberry.
Has a whole lot.
Strawberries have citric, malic, ascorbic, elagic, and pantothenic.
Okay, I've never heard of those last two.
But the important thing is that strawberries have these two acids as primary acids. So that makes it a little more complex of an acidic flavor in a strawberry. That might be why I like them so much. You'll hear the term acid blend. I think maybe more in beer making, people will recommend putting acid blend in. That's basically just all three of these put together so
Yeah.
that you don't have one flavor of acid that is more than the rest. And that isn't a bad technique depending on what it is that you're making. We don't do that. We usually stick with one. We did make something here a month ago or so that we made our own blend and put it in, and I don't remember what that was.
I don't either, but
It was a white wine.
the wine kits come with the blend,
Some of them
acid
come with
blend.
blends. I
I just don't really like the citric very much, so I try to stay away from it.
I'll link above when we think of what it was that we did use acid blend, and I'll link it above so that you can see. But I think it's usually going to be a much better idea to use the main acid or acids from whatever the fruit is. If you're making a strawberry wine, then maybe you want to make a blend of the citric, malic, ascorbic, elagic,
Pelagic.
and pantothenic.
Who's
If
got
you
that
can
sitting
find those,
around?
I don't know, but citric and malic, obviously, you can make a blend of.
An
So
ascorbic acid.
you
could
can
do.
research. I have it on my to-do list to create a tool on our craftywiners.com/tools page that will list the acid amounts for popular fruits. It's going to do more than that, but that's going to be one of the things that it'll do. So watch for that. I will have that. Otherwise, just Google what the acids are in a Merlot grape, for instance. And the Google AI is actually pretty good at coming up with a summary, but it keeps you from having to go through a lot of pages. But you'll probably easily find a page that states what the different percentages of acids are, and then try to emulate that in your blend if you're going to do it as a blend. In case it wasn't obvious, the acids lower the pH, and then our carbonates or bicarbonates will raise the pH. So there are two major compounds that will raise the pH, make it less acidic, and that is potassium bicarbonate and calcium carbonate. There are others, but these are the two that we use and that most winemakers use.
Mhm.
This is basically chalk, and this is a little bit more complicated than that, but they recommend that you use this for small pH changes and this for large. We honestly use almost primarily this, and the
Yeah.
reason why is that in our experiments on the first video we did on pH, our water experiments, we realized how much this changes the appearance and the taste.
It made it
It's-
milky.
Yeah, and this didn't. So we try to stay away from this. Almost the only time that I use this is sometimes you'll notice that the pH changes very, very, very little. And it may take, I'll put 2/4 teaspoons of this in and it really didn't affect the pH. So at that point, sometimes I'll pull this out and use a quarter teaspoon of it, and it usually makes it jump again like I want. But that's about the only time I use this. I don't know about what Julie does.
I almost always use that.
We do use, and we have it on our little bottles that we use on our videos.
Measurements.
We have the measurements, and the measurements that we use typically are a quarter teaspoon, which if you're doing a really large, like a full point pH change, it's not going to change it much to put a quarter teaspoon, and you're safe to go ahead and do a half or even 3/4 of a teaspoon to save you time, because you've got to put this in, mix it with the must really well, pour it in, mix it into
Mix it
that,
again.
do the test, and that can be very time consuming. So there's going to be a tendency to want to do more, but being small and being under the change that you're going for than going too far and
Yes.
having to use the opposite compound and put more acid
Bring it
in
back
to
down.
bring it back down.
Because then you're just really messing with the taste.
Yeah, and you're adding a lot of compounds to the wine that are going to probably settle out, and it's
Yeah.
just, you're better off to use the smallest measurement that you know that you're safe doing. And for us, that's always been a quarter teaspoon at a time.
Once we've got a recipe down using our batch notes and we're using the same concentrate,
Same.
we know what we need to
Yeah.
put in there.
If
So
we have,
you're
if we
safe
know that,
there.
especially if the concentrate or juice or whatever it is starts at the same pH that our previous batch did, you're pretty safe putting the full amount that you used last time. And that's where batch notes come in to be so handy, and because it's so reproducible and it saves you a lot of time.
Yeah.
You're basically just taking the pH to verify that the pH was the same as last time. Use the measurements that you used on your batch notes the last time, mix it in, take the pH and verify that it came out the same, and you're done. You don't have to do the quarter teaspoon method. We will be showing you on a glass of crappy Mexican wine, raising and lowering the pH, just to show you how
Do
we
we
do
still have that?
We
I
didn't-
thought I threw that away.
We didn't throw it away. I knew that it was going to have a use someday. So, as I kind of just alluded to, especially these two, not so much the acids, but as the wine sits, these will tend to float to the bottom of and end up being part of the lees. So since you don't normally put these in typically until after you rack, it can cause you to have to cold crash or rack again. You'll see the sediment down at the bottom. So we usually will rack twice. We'll rack out of the primary fermenter, treat for the pH, put the potassiums in to stop future fermentation.
And the clarifiers.
And then before we bottle, we'll typically rack again because this stuff is settled to the bottom.
Yep.
And sometimes, more fruit sediment or whatever is down to the bottom, but we'll usually rack it again right before we bottle just to make sure that it's going to be as clear as possible and none of this stuff is settled down.
Yeah.
One last thing on the acids that I actually probably put in the wrong place on my notes is that some people use lemons or limes or rinds instead of the citric acid or the other two. There's one guy in particular that uses lemons for even red wines. It changes the taste 100% of the time. So I don't recommend that. These change the taste a lot less. The citric acid does change the taste a little. It does add a little sour that is like a citrus sour, but not nearly what a lemon would do.
Yeah.
And this is refined from lemon, so this is not any less healthy for you than a lemon is. However, it takes a lot of lemons to come up with a quarter teaspoon of citric acid.
It's true.
So do what you want. It is, using a lemon is probably cheaper and it's probably easier to come by at the grocery store. In fact, I checked at our grocery store to try to find a packaged citric acid, and Walmart carries it. I know I've seen it there, but our little local grocery store does not. So you may have a harder time finding citric acid than you want a lemon, and if that's the case, it's great in a pinch.
I think around canning time, you can probably find it pretty easily.
And pectic enzyme, yeah.
Yeah, because they use it
in
for citric acid's used in canning tomatoes, especially.
maybe for the same reason. Is that a stability thing?
Yep.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about pH testers themselves. We have several that we've used over the years. One is your basic test strip, and these have their place, but I don't believe it's really in winemaking. The colors on this, unless maybe I'm more colorblind than some, it's easy to tell the color difference between a full point For instance, I can tell the color difference between 7 and 8.
Yeah.
But when you get a variation of that color and it's in between, there's a big difference between 7 and 7.5. And that's a huge difference in winemaking.
Mm-hmm.
So when you get down to 3, which is like an orange, and 4, which is like a light orange,
Those are hard to differentiate
you're not
between.
going to know if you're at 3.6, 3.7, 3.8. So these just are not accurate enough. They're accurate, but the human eye cannot differentiate the colors well enough to figure out what color that is. Maybe if you had a comparison sheet that was a mile long and had all the different variations of colors, then you could put it up to that and try to figure it out. But the typical guide that's on a pH strip wheel like this, you can't have a full point variance of pH because there's a huge difference, like we've been saying, between 3.6 and 3.8.
Right.
So we don't use these. Sometimes it's nice to use this as a comparison if you think your meter is whacked. And I have done
We
that.
have done that.
And that's basically why we have these laying around.
I used to use these, well, probably a different product, but for our fish tank.
I think it's the same product.
Yeah.
They use pH to test water to make sure that it's safe and
And hot tubs and pools.
swimming pools.
Yep.
This actually, I believe, is mainly designed for a swimming pool.
Oh, is it?
This is not battery powered. This is electrical powered, and this is meant to be put in something and kept there. And the last time I opened this, it dumped a whole bunch of the preserving fluid. But we'll be talking about that in a minute. I used this a lot on our Frankenwines because I wanted to be monitoring the pH level constantly to make sure that it didn't go below or above a certain level. So this would fit down on my carboy, and I had a special bung that would allow the cord to go through. And so this would sit down on the carboy for the whole life of the fermentation. And this would display the pH on it, and it's plugged into power, so didn't have to worry about batteries. And there's an app to monitor this.
That's pretty
So
cool.
if you really want to be watching pH closely on a batch, this was pretty cool. They're not really cheap, and I don't use it right now, which makes me feel like it wasn't a really good deal for us because it's just been sitting.
Well, because with the regular wines that we do now and the ciders and stuff, it doesn't jump around so much. Those
we know-
Franken wines were like
We know what to
constantly
expect.
going
There's-
high.
Potassium benzoate is a preservative in soda, and we were turning soda into fermented soda versions. And if the pH went above 5, the potassium benzoate would kick in and basically stop the fermentation.
Yeah.
So baking soda is an alternative to
Oh, yeah.
calcium carbonate and potassium bicarbonate. So on the Frankenwines, I was putting baking soda in every day to keep the pH above 5, because if it went lower, the potassium benzoate would kick the yeast butt basically and stop the fermentation. So I needed to keep a very close watch on it. The app on this does not send alerts. If it did send alerts, it would be perfect. But it does allow you from upstairs to look at your phone and see what the pH is without walking downstairs. So there's that. This is the pH meter that we used for a long time, and this is a lot cheaper. It's maybe a third of the price of the one that we use now. I would not waste my time on one of these ever again. The battery life is so short, you're going to make up for the difference in batteries in just the first month.
Yeah, it eats batteries.
Seriously, you could take. We would go through batteries on one episode of filming. It's 2 batteries in here. The other thing is that they don't make it clear which direction batteries go in, which I ended up making a note on here so that I wouldn't forget. But yeah, this thing just eats batteries. I didn't know how bad it was until I got one that didn't do that. And now this has not been used for months, and we probably will never use it again. We've got it here as a backup. This style, I'm not going to say necessarily this brand because there are quite a few that are, I think, imitators, or this is an imitator of, but this is the one that we won't go back from. Battery life is great. We've used this consistently for 6 months at least, and I've replaced the batteries one time.
Yeah.
So it's huge. It takes 3 batteries instead of 2, and that probably is a major design difference that is why this one is so bad. It only takes 2 batteries. But the accuracy may not be better than this, but battery life alone makes it worthwhile. So, in my opinion. And all of these things will be linked in the description below if you want to get any of these items. So, something that's super important that I think a lot of times gets missed is that these need to be calibrated often. They do not stay accurate in any of the instruction guides for these will tell you as much. If you use them often, you need to calibrate, and if you don't use them often, you need to calibrate, basically. But in every month or more often, you should calibrate them too. So we ended up with a decent, easy setup for calibrating. I guess these are probably backwards for you. So these are called buffer solution powder. And you've got one that creates a solution of 4.01 pH, one that's 6.86 pH, and one 9.18 pH. And these are what this one uses. This pool one uses it uses two packets, and they are different measurements. And I can't off the top of my head tell you what they are, and it's not really important, but it is not the same as what these use. But so to make this really easy, we bought some of these 250 milliliter jars, and that's because these are 250 milliliter solutions that these powders make. So you put 250 milliliters of distilled water, which goes up to exactly to where you see these filled, and then you put each one of these solutions in here, and you shake it really good, or if you're not using these jars, mix it really good, and you end up with a solution that is going to test to whatever that number is. So this should always come out to 9.18, right? This should always come out to 4.01. This should always come out to 6.86. And this should always come out to 9.18. So if they don't, that's what the calibration process is for. And typically when I calibrate them, I don't care to see what they were off by. I just want them to be right. So this is my process. I shake these up because otherwise that powder sometimes settles to the bottom. I take the lids off, keep the lids in front of the bottle they're for because I don't want any of the liquid in any of these jars to get into any of the other ones more than is already going to happen. And you can be more careful than me, but then you're also wasting time in my opinion. So I stick this in here. It doesn't go very far, but it's far enough. I shake this around. I let the reading stabilize. And that sometimes will take 10, 15 seconds. As soon as you see that the numbers quit, now this is saying 4.03, and that's because this is fairly well calibrated. I just calibrated these yesterday. But I still am going to calibrate it because I went through the trouble to get these out and shake them up and put these out on my display here for you. So I'm still going to calibrate it. So to calibrate this particular model, you hold the calibration button that says CAL down, and it's going to blink cal, and then it blinks 4.01. So after you see it blink that, you let go, and now it's calibrated to 4.01. So I just told it that this solution is 4.01, and pH meter, you're wrong. What you said, 4.03, is not right. And I made it adjust itself to this being 4.01. So now I shake all of the liquid off that I can, because again, I don't want that liquid to be transferring to here and messing up the pH in this jar. So now I put it in my second jar, which is the 6.86, and it's the same routine. Shake it up and down, make sure that that sensor is getting a good sample of the liquid. And now it came up and said 6.83. Getting pretty close, but I'm going to get it right on. So now it just changed to 6.9. So again, why you want to give it some time.
Because it changes.
Because it does change. So as soon as it hasn't changed for 10 seconds, I know it's stable. You hold down the mode cal button till it flashes cal a few times, and then now it's flashing 6.86, and I probably can show that to you. So I let go of the button. Now it's calibrated to the second solution. So shake it all off. And the way that I said you could be more careful if you wanted to, you could run to the sink and rinse this off between solutions. That probably is a better idea, just to make sure you're not spreading the more acidic to the less acidic in this case. But I don't take the time to do that. I just shake it off. So now I'm going to do the final one. This is called a 3-point calibration because I'm using all 3 buffer solutions. You can get away with just doing 2. But again, if I'm going to go to the trouble to do it, I'd rather do the more accurate 3-point. So this is saying 9.16, which is pretty darn close to 9.18. But I'm still going to do it. So hold down the cal. it says cal, and then it blinks the 9.18. It knows based on which number it's closest to, which solution you put it into, which is kind of cool. Some of these, and I think that one included, you have to tell it which solution you've put it in. This one figures it out, and that's kind of cool. So get all the liquid off. Now this time, as with every time that I am done with a liquid, I'm going to go rinse this off in the sink. So that's a stream of water that's going to get all of the liquid off the sensor. And then after I do that, I'm going to use my gallon of distilled water that's sitting right next to the sink to do a light rinse of distilled water. And that's to get the minerals that are in my tap water off the sensor. Because that's what's going to destroy my sensor is stuff caking onto it, drying onto it, including the minerals in my tap water, and making it so that this pH meter doesn't work anymore. So I'm going to do that real quick, and then we'll keep talking. You can do it less than I do, and my note actually says 10 uses or weekly at minimum. But I definitely do it before we film, anytime before we film, and usually if I'm going to do 2 or 3 batches in a day, I'll start with calibrating. So you can't calibrate too much. I replace these liquids because you are spreading one to the next, and you will end up seeing stuff growing in here over time. I don't know why. I have no idea why, but you do. So I replace these liquids about once a month. And so I just dump those out, wash the containers out really good, and then do my buffer powders again. You don't necessarily have to do it that often. You don't necessarily have to do any of this way that I'm doing it. I just do it to be nice and easy because I don't usually enjoy doing stuff like this. It's kind of a laborious chore that I don't necessarily enjoy.
But we want our pHs to be accurate.
We do want and if you don't do this, your pHs will be off.
Yeah.
Absolutely 100% guarantee. If you've never calibrated your pH meter, now is a good time to do it. So the other thing that you need to do as far as the care of this is keep storage solution that's designed for pH meters. Keep that on these sensors. There's a lot of ways you can do this, and this is more important if these are going to sit for any amount of time because the glass will dry out and it gets damaged. So the way that I normally do this, and I don't have it today because I just cleaned it, but I put a little piece of cotton down at the bottom of the cap and soak that in the solution, and it'll be just a big enough cotton swab that I know that the sensor's touching it when the cap is on. And so I mentioned earlier, I'd forgotten that I'd filled this up with fluid. So when I took the lid off, the storage fluid went on the floor and the dogs tried to get at it. So we had to catch them fast. But the cotton swab soaked in the storage solution will make sure that this sensor is always in the storage solution. But that can get nasty too and get stuff growing in it. So you've got to remember to swap out the cotton balls like maybe once a month. Wouldn't be a bad idea to do it all on the same day. Replace these buffer solutions and the cotton that's in the end of this once a month. Okay, so we show you this on most of our videos, even though we try to not get bogged down in the pH stuff of our videos, but we normally show doing the pH measurement and adjustment. So we're just going to show just a real quick demonstration of that with this really crappy Mexican Chardonnay that they gave us as part of our all-inclusive.
I still don't believe it's Chardonnay. Does not taste like Chardonnay.
It is just not, it's not good, which is why we still have it and which is why I'm going to be disposing of it after we're done with this. So right now, without any modification, it's got a 3.19 pH. Again, keep it in the fluid until it hasn't switched to a new number for a little while. And I don't believe that matters. It doesn't make any difference what pH meter you have. They all have that little period of where they're unsure. So now it just switched to 3.18 and it's been there for a minute, so we'll call that good. Write that down for me.
Where do you want me to write it? We don't want a batch note.
Just on your notes.
3.18.
Yeah, so we're starting at 3.18. She's going to grab her potassium bicarbonate. Just again, to be safe, I'm going to only want to do a 1/4 teaspoon at a time. So we put it in. Mix this really well.
This one takes quite a bit of mixing too.
And if this was really must, I would be using our sucky thing to take the must out of a different jar put it in here and put the potassium bicarbonate into it, mix it up in here, and then pour it back in. Again, you see that in all of our videos, but I'm just trying to give you an idea of best methodology for dealing with pH. And that means stirring this
A lot.
really well till you don't see any of the solid stuff down at the bottom. If you don't get it mixed up all the way, you're not getting the full effect of what the change is that it's supposed to make.
Right.
So now we'll take our pH again. And case in point of why you want to do small measurements is that this jumped way up to 5.21.
How is that possible? 3.18 to 5.21?
Because this isn't a gallon.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
Yeah, I would have had to have used, this is a...
What? Is that a cup? It's a little over a cup.
It's between 1/3 and 2/3 of a cup. So yeah, our 1/4 teaspoon is meant for dealing with a gallon of solution. So
that's when we would have needed to break out the 1/32.
Yeah, or less. So again, we weren't trying to be accurate on this. We're just trying to show you mainly just how you should deal with mixing. So to lower this back down, we can do a 1/4 teaspoon of what's in crappy Chardonnay.
In crappy Chardonnay?
Got to be tartaric.
I don't think.
Maybe citric.
It's probably citric if it's crappy.
Let's just do citric. It's cheaper.
Okay.
We're not drinking this anyway.
No. Well, with that low of a pH, 3.18, and it was sour, so I have a feeling they did use citric acid.
I don't think Chardonnay should be 3.18.
No, it shouldn't.
It's probably part of the problem with that wine. But so in theory, this will take it back down into the neighborhood of the 3.18, although there is going to be a difference in the effect of citric acid and potassium bicarbonate. They're not equals by any means. And the different acids will affect the acidity level differently too. Tartaric, I believe, is the strongest of those three. Stay away from the hydrochloric acid in your wine. I wouldn't recommend it.
Did you really need to say that?
Mixed audience. So that took it back down to 4.31, so only about half the jump back down.
Because citric acid isn't very...
It's not as affecting as the potassium bicarbonate was taking it up. So, yeah, useless information, but...
Not useless.
We wanted to show you... The main effect of that is make sure you mix everything very well, or you're not going to get the effect that you're expecting. And if you don't mix one up well and then you mix the next one out well, you'll end up with jumps that you can't explain.
Yeah.
Okay, so the last thing we're going to go over on this video is TA, or titratable acidity. And that is the measurement of total acid that is in your wine in this case. This is more important in wine than it is in cider or beer making for sure. pH is a measurement of how strong those acids are. But again, TA is how much acid quantity is in your wine. So it'd be like you have an ounce of acid in two different drinks. One is the acid from jalapenos and one is the acid from ghost peppers. It's the same amount of acid, but one is a lot stronger than the other. So that strength is the pH, but that ounce of acid is the TA, or titratable.
Titratable.
Yes. Say that 10 times fast. So for us, we don't go over TA very often. I think we've done it in one or maybe two videos, and I think in one video we lost some of the footage and it didn't make it into the edited version. But TA is not nearly as important of a figure for an amateur winemaker, a home winemaker, as pH. pH is all important partly because of the taste, and then partly, as we've been talking about, having a shelf-stable wine that can last. TA, basically, its use is just the taste. It's a number that you can assign to a taste, a sourness taste or an acidity taste, and that's why it's important. So it's not as important to you or to us, but we're going to go over it, show you how it works. And our corgi is prowling. What are you doing?
What's she doing?
What are you doing, Pippin?
Pippin, come here. She's investigating something.
She feels like there's something that needs to be checked out elsewhere, but she's being very noisy in her toenails. You show people your pretty bandana from getting your nails done.
Yeah, you can't tell she got her nails done. They're still loud, but they're much shorter.
Are you going to show yours off too?
Come here, Nora. Let's see. Let's see your. Let's see your bandana. Can you sit pretty? She's like, what are you doing? Sit pretty. Can you sit pretty?
Probably has a treat, Andy.
Oh, that's a good girl. All right, I'll give you a treat.
Pippin was making sure you don't have. Slight pause on our TA conversation and the treats.
I can't say treat and not follow through with the treat. Okay, ready? There you go. Ready? Now you're cheating. You're cheating.
You can't use the chair.
You can't use me. Okay, sit pretty. Good girl. Okay, treat's done.
Okay, back to TA. So again, TA and pH are two different measurements. One is quantity, one is strength. They are usually very closely aligned because the more acid you add, the more acid flavor is in the wine must and the more acidic it's going to taste.
Right.
But that's not always the case. So pH, the lower the number is, as we've stated, the more acidic it is. But it's just the opposite with TA. The more acid there is, the higher the TA rating is. And it's called grams per liter, usually. It's based on the metric system, so we have to do a little more calculating unless you if you do all your measuring using milliliters, it comes out a lot easier for your grams per liter measurement, and that's what I'm going to be showing you. So the way that you measure it, there are a couple ways, and we have a machine that I failed to clean up. I bought it off of eBay, and it's really kind of nasty. I haven't cleaned it up.
We've never used it.
If we had all of the reagents that you're supposed to have for it, which we don't yet. But this is what we're going to be showing you, the manual process. And there are a couple different manual processes as well. The one that we're doing, I think, works the best and is probably the most accurate, but you can do it in other ways. This is sodium hydroxide, and we mentioned earlier that that's a main ingredient in drain cleaners.
Yeah.
This is a super high pH. It's like 14. So the concept behind this is you take your super high pH and you put acid into it, and you try to get your pH meter down to 8.2, and the amount of sodium hydroxide that you put in there gives you the amount of acid that you neutralized, basically, by putting in this alkaline. So that's the concept behind it. This I got off of Amazon. You don't, in this undiluted condition, you need to be very, very, very careful with this stuff. It can cause blindness if you get it in your eyes, for instance. So don't do that. I diluted it. So I took this, and it's 1 part of that to 4 points of distilled water. And this is what I end up using. Again, another one of these 250 milliliter jars. So this is still dangerous. Don't drink it. Don't get it in your eyes. But it's a lot less so than this. This is a 1.0 M, which is 1.0 molar, or also known as 1.0 normal. So to get the 0.2 normal, I had to look at my notes, or 0.2 molarity, you do this 1 part of the hydroxide to 4 parts distilled water. We almost had a tragedy in that the pH adjusted wine got thrown out, but we had some more of the bottle. So this is the 3.18 pH crappy Mexican Chardonnay. Chardonnay was in quotes.
Chardonnay.
So what I do to take my TA reading is I have 2 different sizes of syringes. One is smaller than the other, which will make sense here in a minute. I need 15 milliliters of the wine must, and in this case it's actually wine. Again, that was in quotes. So I'm using a 20 milliliter syringe to make it easy to get 15. Any of this 15 milliliters that you take is going to be discarded. You definitely don't put this back into your wine container. So that's 15 milliliters of Mexican Chardonnay. I put it in a little test beaker. It doesn't really need to be a beaker. You can use another type of container for sure. And again, I'm going to throw this out. So this can go away.
I'll put it over here.
So now I'm going to use a smaller, this is a 10 milliliter sucker thing.
Syringe. Sucker thing.
And the reason I am using 2 different ones is that this one, it's easier to get my 10. and it's got more further distance between the numbers, so that it's easier for me to be accurate on my amounts, more so than this 20 milliliter. So I'm going to draw up 10 milliliters. And the reason it's 10 milliliters is to make the math easy. And this I won't be discarding. I'll be putting whatever I don't use back into this container. With these syringes, the liquid sometimes follows behind the plunger a little bit, so make sure you're actually getting 10. Now I have 10 in here. So what I'm going to do, the goal of this is I'm going to add drops of this into my wine must and continually measure using my pH meter until the pH ends up being 8.2. As close to on the dot as I can. And then the number of milliliters of hydroxide that I put in there subtracted from 10 is my pH. So I'll explain that as we go. But just as a sanity check, it's now showing as 3.28, and I really don't know why. This came from the same bottle, but whatever. I'm not going to argue with it. So I know my TA is going to be at least 3, so I'm safe to go ahead and put the first 3 milliliters in there. So I'm going from 10 down to 7, just to save myself time. So I usually just use my pH meter to mix it up. Mix it up fairly well, and again, you're giving the pH meter time to keep adjusting itself. And it's saying 4.54. So we're not nearly there to 8.2 yet. So I'm going to go ahead and add another one. I'm going to go to 6 on my sucky thing. I've got a bubble in there, so I'm trying to mentally adjust for what that level is. 5.04.
Getting there.
So I'm going to put another one in. And you could probably get away with doing more than I am. I just don't want to embarrass myself by passing up 8.2. So, okay, now I'm down to 5. So that means I've put 5 milliliters of sodium hydroxide in my must. So that means it's got at least 5 TA, 5.3. The syringe is showing me it's at 4, which means since I started at 10, I've put 6 milliliters so far of sodium hydroxide into this must. Now my pH is 7. So I only want, I'm going to get to 8.2. So
That's very little.
It's not very much I'm going to be putting in. I'm going to start now at half a milliliter instead of a full.
Which isn't the easiest
So I do
thing.
have a bubble there that I'm trying to accommodate, but that's at it's 4.5. And you don't have to get to the exact number, honestly. I'm at 8.
Mm.
The little tiny bit amount of this that I'm going to put in there is probably not worth the time to try to get, because it's a fractional amount of a milliliter. So why even mess with it? When you're at 8 and you're trying to go to 8.2, as much as this is going to jump with just a drop.
Yeah.
And just as an example, I'm going to put a drop in there. 1 drop. There's 1 drop. And we'll see how much that changes it. 8.24.
Yeah.
It's changing. It's changing a little bit, but 8.10. So I now can calculate very easily, because of the quantities and stuff that I used, that my TA is 6.5, because I'm down to the 3.5 measurement on my syringe, which means that I've put 6.5 milliliters of the solution in my must to put it to 8.2-ish. So that is my TA, 6.5, of this crappy Mexican Chardonnay. So, according to my notes, commonly white wines will be between 6 and 9, and reds between 6 and 7. So that falls in the range. That would say that this is actually on the low end, believe it or not, of TA for a white wine. I think it's quite acidic.
Yeah,
and
it is.
This is where sometimes you'll see a break between TA and pH. because we do know that this is a very acidic, the pH is very acidic. So different winemakers are going to have different opinions of what the TA should be for different wines. But again, you can usually use this as a guideline to know that you are either below or above what the acidity is of other major winemakers for the particular wine that you're making. So you can Google for the TA or the titratable acidity for Chardonnay, and what we came up with, or what we Googled from Winemaker magazine, was between 6 and 7.
Yeah.
So we are right on there as far as Winemaker magazine is concerned at 6.5. The amount of acid that's in this Chardonnay is right where it should be. So how does this relate to pH? The only time we are going to take this into account is if we're outside of the range, and then we might think about adding or trying to eliminate some of the acid. If we tasted it and thought, well, it's a little bit light on acidic flavor, let's test the TA. We test the TA, and sure enough, it's low. At that point, we may add some acid to get that TA higher. And there are formulas that I will link, that kind of a rule of thumb of how much tartaric acid that you would add for 1 point of
TA.
So this is a rule of thumb. 3.8 grams tartaric acid per US gallon raises the TA by 0.1%, which is the equivalent of 1 gram per liter. So if I was at 5.5 and wanted to be 6.5, I could add 3.8 grams of tartaric acid to get there. There are calculators out there, and we will end up with one. We don't have one yet. That'll calculate this for you if you're using metric or whatever. So what we do and how we relate our TA to our pH is we will get our pH level, regardless of what wine it is, or even a cider, to 3.8. We'll taste it. We'll decide whether or not it seems like it's lacking acid. If we think that it might be, we will take the TA reading. And if that is a confirmation that it's a little on the low side of acid, we will add some acid. But that's the only time that TA comes into a factor for us. And that's why you don't see it on every one of our videos, because that's a lot of screen time on something that really isn't all that important to an amateur winemaker. If you're Gallo is the first one to come to mind. That's not really the highest quality. It's not the highest
Robert
quality
Mondavi.
winemaker. Yeah, if you're okay, so if you're Mondavi, it's going to be a lot more important for you to have that TA right on the button. But for somebody that's at home, taste is what's more important, but pH of 3.8 or lower is more important than that if you're going to be bottling it.
And
So-
we will lower the pH based on taste.
You know, we do it a lot. And again, there are times where get rid of sweetness, that zing that you want. Depends on the variety of wine.
Actually,
Depends on the grapes.
Yeah,
You could have two
ciders.
batches of Merlot that have two different pHs.
That's true.
I would recommend, this is what we do. We get to a pH of 3.8 because that's where you're starting your shelf stability. And then after you get to that level, or a little bit below is good, taste it. See if you think that it needs more acid. If you think that it might, take your TA reading. And if it's also low, add some acid. If you end up with the opposite of that, if you end up with too much acid, then you do have the ability to lower it by using potassium bicarbonate. Raises the pH and lowers the TA.
Yeah.
But again, keep in mind your 3.8 pH is the all-important number. So don't raise your pH to get your TA down, because the 3.8 pH is more important.
That's what's important.
So this isn't the easiest subject, but hopefully we didn't explain it in too complicated or too confusing of a way. So I can reuse the sodium hydroxide that I didn't put in here. This is total garbage. Dump down your drain and then run water down your drain. It's
It'll clean your drain,
it's caustic.
right?
It probably it might
So it's good. Put it down your
does
drain.
have that benefit. I believe that's all we wanted to cover. And yeah, we went over a lot of material here, so please let us know if we need to do a third pH video to make sure that you understood our second one.
You can just watch it several times. Just keep replaying it.
Yeah, just slow motion maybe.
Well, thank you guys for your time. I hope that this video was very informative for you. We have found that pH is a really complicated subject, and there's not a lot of good information out there all in one place. So that's what we were trying to do, and hopefully we did that for you. Please like and subscribe if you haven't already, and if you have subscribed to our channel, thank you. We appreciate you very much. Until next time, cheers!